Hayden Panettiere.
Hayden Panettiere.
Hayden Panettiere.
Hayden Panettiere.
Hayden Panettiere, known for her roles on the popular TV series like Heroes, Nashville film franchises like Bring It On and Scream, has died at the age of just 36. She began her career as a child actor.
Ever wonder what was really going on behind the scenes of Hayden Panettiere's life in her final months? After years of silence, she had chosen transparency, releasing a memoir that stripped back every carefully maintained illusion and replaced it with raw, unfiltered truth. She was talking, working, rebuilding, and showing up. And then, on August 16, 2026, she was gone at just 36 years old. This is Hayden Panettiere's story, told through her own words and final moments. The world is only now beginning to understand how much she was carrying before she ran out of time. Opening up before the world. For much of her adult life, Hayden Panettiere existed in the gap between who the public believed her to be and who she actually was. The girl who smiled through interviews, played lovable characters, and showed up on red carpets had been quietly carrying things that very few people understood. But in 2026, that silence ended in the most public and deliberate way possible. She released her memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, on May 19, 2026, and nothing was held back. The book, published by Hachette Book Group, described what Panettiere called her lifequakes, moments that fractured her sense of self so completely that rebuilding became the only option left. The memoir opened up about postpartum depression, addiction and recovery, trauma, domestic abuse, and the devastating loss of her younger brother. All of it delivered with a level of candor that surprised even her most devoted fans. She had hinted at a book in 2024 when it was still being titled Scream and Break Free: Addiction, Trauma, and How the Cheerleader Saved Herself. By the time it arrived in May 2026, it had taken on a far more personal shape. One of the memoir's most startling revelations centered on how her addiction had started. She told The Hollywood Reporter in May that a member of her team had given her stimulants at just 15 years old, pills described as something that would make her more focused and energetic during interviews. I had no idea that this was not an appropriate thing, or what door that would open for me when it came to my addiction, she said. In the book, she wrote that those pills would forever change her world, describing them at 16 as the gateway drug that ushered me toward the good of pharmaceuticals and the downfall of addiction. A teenager handed something dangerous by the adults who were supposed to protect her. That detail alone rewrites much of what people thought they understood about her early career. Panettiere also revealed she was fired as a spokesperson for Neutrogena after discussing postpartum depression on live television, calling the company's decision something completely uncontrollable and really painful. She became addicted to Klonopin and alcohol after the birth of her daughter Kaya in 2014 with former fiancé Vladimir Klitschko, and the first thought she had each morning, she wrote, was not her child or her career, but when she could next have a drink. Those years filming Nashville, from 2015 to 2018, carried a particular cruelty. The writers began mirroring her character Juliette Barnes's storyline so closely to her real life that reading each day's script felt like looking into a distorted reflection. Juliette Barnes had postpartum depression, an alcohol and pill problem, and a divorce on the horizon. Every time I read the day's script, it was like I was looking in a funhouse mirror, she wrote. No one on set addressed it. The environment, she said, was enabling rather than protective. She also opened up about giving up custody of Kaya, then just 2 years old, a decision that had been publicly misread for years as abandonment. Klitschko was given full custody, and Kaya, now 11 years old, was raised in Europe. In interviews promoting the memoir, Panettiere pushed back firmly against the idea that she had walked away. She had made the hardest possible decision out of love, and the book gave her the space to say so plainly and without apology. She also publicly came out as bisexual during this promotional period, telling US Weekly that fear of judgment had kept her from speaking openly for years. Around the time of the book's release, she told E! News in a May 18th interview that acting had become her outlet again, and that she needed it. She had taken a 4-year break from the industry between Nashville's end in 2018 and her return in 2023's Scream 6, where she reprised her fan-favorite role of Kirby Reed, now reimagined as an FBI agent. By September 2024, she sat down with Hoda and Jenna on The Today Show to talk about her new projects and grief, telling viewers, "No one should be embarrassed by it or judged for it." The return to public conversation was deliberate and entirely on her terms. She told People magazine in 2024 that she hoped readers would finish the memoir feeling inspired and that the book might provide a little comfort for those who have faced similar challenges. She described herself as genuinely grateful for every lesson she had been through and for the woman she had become because of them. Those words, it turns out, would be among the most forward-looking things she ever said. She had no way of knowing how little time she had left. The weight of losing Jansen. Before the memoir, before the press tours, before any of the structured attempts at reclaiming her narrative, Hayden Panettiere received news in February 2023 that changed everything. Her younger brother and fellow actor, Hayden Panettiere, was found dead in his Nyack, New York apartment. He was 28 years old. The family would later confirm the cause as cardiomegaly, an enlarged heart coupled with aortic valve complications. No warning, no gradual goodbye. Just an absence that arrived without permission. Jansen had been Hayden's only sibling, and in the years that followed his death, she spoke repeatedly about how that loss had taken shape not just in her spirit, but in her body. She became agoraphobic for a period, afraid to leave her home, unwilling to go to fittings or look at herself in the mirror. Rapid weight gain followed. The emotional shock had translated directly into physical change. "He was my only sibling, and it was my job to protect him," she said in a People cover story. The guilt did not need to be rational. It did not care. She had been sober and working when Jansen died. That detail carries its own particular weight. She had built real stability and had reconnected with the discipline that once defined her childhood career. His death struck that stability without warning. She had to rebuild all over again from a different kind of rubble. When she appeared on The Today Show in September 2024 to promote Amber Alert, she described how grief had altered her physically and how working out had become the thing that allowed her to walk through her own front door again. She credited her publicist for connecting her with a personal trainer, and through that slow process, she worked her way back toward a version of herself she recognized. By 2024, she had also told people that she had begun to experience something like recovery, not from addiction this time, but from the agoraphobia and emotional collapse that followed Jansen's death. She had attended the Scream 6 premiere in New York in March 2023, just weeks after losing her brother. During a GMA appearance surrounding that premiere, co-anchor Michael Strahan extended condolences, and she responded quietly, saying Jansen was right here with me. She had shown up anyway. She had done the interviews, walked the carpet, played the character, and carried something enormous in private the entire time. By the time the memoir arrived in May 2026, a substantial portion of it addressed grief directly. She described to The Today Show in 2024 that losing someone you saw in all the important moments in your life, standing right next to you, just rocks your world. She did not pretend it had gotten easier. She described it as ongoing, complicated, and honest work, the kind that does not end, but only changes shape. In her final year, the shadow of that grief stayed close. Sources told TMZ after her death that she had been complaining to people around her about persistent back pain throughout 2025. She had been photographed on crutches in March 2026 due to pinched nerves in her lower back. The physical toll of the preceding years had not disappeared simply because she was speaking about it more openly. Jansen's absence was not something she had moved past. It was something she had learned to move with, carrying it into every interview, every chapter of the book, every public appearance, and never pretending otherwise. The South Carolina trip with Brian. The story of Hayden Panettiere's final journey begins in Los Angeles. On August 15, 2026, the day before her death, she traveled from Los Angeles to Greenville, South Carolina, with Brian Hickerson, her on-again, off-again boyfriend. The trip was not announced. There was no social media post marking the journey. Officials confirmed that no foul play was suspected following her death, and the investigation remained open. Brian Hickerson had been present in Hayden's life in a complicated and recurring way for 8 years, from 2018 through 2026. The relationship had been volatile and extensively documented. In May 2019, police observed visible marks on her body and arrested Hickerson on felony domestic violence charges, though that case was later dismissed when prosecutors could not secure a key witness. He was arrested again in 2020 after allegedly striking her in the face during a trip to Wyoming. He ultimately pleaded no contest to 2 felony counts of injuring a spouse or cohabitant, served 45 days in jail, received 4 years of probation, and was ordered to complete California's 52-week Batterer Intervention Program. After his incarceration, Hayden wrote on Instagram in 2021 that she was coming forward with the truth about what happened, hoping her story would empower others in abusive relationships to get the help they need and deserve. She described herself as grateful to the support system that had helped her regain my voice and my life. That statement was pointed, public, and unmistakably clear. Yet by 2026, they had resumed contact. In March 2026, the two were photographed together at Los Angeles International Airport. Hayden was on crutches because of pinched nerves in her lower back, and Brian walked closely beside her. A source told TMZ at the time that they were only friends. In May 2026, Brian sat down for an interview with TMZ, coinciding with the release of Hayden's memoir. He spoke warmly and with visible affection about her, describing Panettiere as someone he held in the highest regard. Hickerson called her a Sunday girl, saying the people who matter are not the ones you spend Saturday night with, but the ones you spend all of Sunday with, and that Hayden was exactly that kind of person. In that same interview window, he acknowledged the abuse publicly, telling outlets there was no justification for what he had done, that he had apologized and that he had spent years in reflection. He said her memoir account could help other abusers recognize and change their behavior. On August 16, 2026, emergency personnel responded to a 911 call reporting a cardiac arrest at the apartment complex in Greenville, where Hayden had been temporarily staying. The Greenville County Coroner's Office confirmed that resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful and that Panettiere was pronounced deceased at 2:32 p.m. An autopsy performed the following day revealed no signs of trauma that would have contributed to her death. The official cause and manner of death remained pending additional testing. Dispatch audio obtained by TMZ included a reference to a possible overdose, though no formal determination had been made at publication. Brian Hickerson had not released a public statement about her death at the time of these reports. His family was described as devastated. The investigation remained open. The trip from Los Angeles to South Carolina had become the final chapter of a story that refused every simple interpretation it was offered. The last post. 3 weeks before her death, Hayden Panettiere posted what would turn out to be the last image she would ever share on Instagram. On July 27, 2026, she uploaded a black and white photograph of herself alongside director, podcaster, and photographer Randall Slavin. She captioned it with 5 words: "Good times and good friends." She was winking at the camera, tongue out slightly, hand resting on Slavin's shoulder while he smiled back at her with an arm around her neck. She looked relaxed. She looked genuinely present. She looked like someone doing fine. The photograph was not recent. Slavin told TMZ after her death that the image had been taken approximately 15 years earlier at a party inside a friend's home. He had stumbled across it on an old hard drive and texted it to Hayden, having no idea she planned to post it publicly. He said he was surprised when it appeared on her page. He also clarified that while they had known each other socially for years, they had not been particularly close recently. He had last seen her in passing more than a year before her death. When news of Hayden's passing broke on August 16th, fans immediately flooded the comments section of that final post, expressing disbelief that the image of her smiling and carefree had been sitting there quietly while everything was shifting somewhere else. Rest in peace, Queen. "You will be missed," one fan wrote. Another said simply, "This can't be real." The post, a throwback to a moment of lightness from a decade and a half earlier, became the last thing the world saw her choose to share. Slavin reposted the image to his Instagram story after learning of her death and captioned it with 4 words, "Peace be with you, H." That final post stands in contrast to how active and visible she had been in the months preceding it. For much of spring and early summer 2026, she had been making up for years of silence all at once, channeling a kind of urgency into every interview and public appearance that, in hindsight, felt like someone determined to be understood. Panettiere had been regularly active on social media throughout the spring and early summer of 2026, promoting her memoir, doing press, conducting interviews, and speaking with an openness about her life that was both deliberate and striking. She had spoken to People, The Hollywood Reporter, E! News, and podcast audiences. The promotional cycle for This Is Me, A Reckoning had been one of the most revealing public stretches of her adult life. The July 27th post marked the end of that visibility. After it, there was quiet. No further posts, no further public statements. No indication of what the final weeks had looked like or felt like. The last glimpse she offered her audience was an old photograph of laughter shared with a friend, chosen and posted in the present tense as though she were simply feeling nostalgic on a Sunday. Whatever she was navigating in those last 3 weeks, she had kept it private. She would have turned 37 on August 21st, 2026, 5 days after she died, a birthday that arrived as an absence rather than a celebration. Her father, Alan "Skip" Panettiere, released a statement to ABC News asking for privacy. "As our family takes time to process this unimaginable loss." Her representative described her as an incredible light and a force of nature who brought immeasurable love and joy to all who knew her and to the millions who watched her on screen. She left behind her daughter, Kaya Evdokia Klitschko, now 11, being raised in Europe with her father. She left behind her mother, Leslie Vogel, and a memoir published just 3 months before her death, a book in which she had finally said everything she had been holding for years, plainly and without softening. She left behind the final Instagram post, a black and white photograph, a wink, and a caption about good times. Hayden Panettiere had spent the last chapter of her life doing something that had always cost her considerably: telling the truth. She had done it on stages, in interviews, in the pages of a book, and in the chair of a Today Show set, and she had done it without apology. She spoke openly about the difficult years, the mistakes, the struggles, and the parts of her life that had once been easier to keep private. What she asked of the world in return was not sympathy, but understanding. She wanted people who had faced similar challenges to recognize themselves in her story and, perhaps, feel a little less alone. That was what all of it was for. Not simply to revisit the past, but to make something meaningful from it. The performances that turned her into a household name, the characters that made audiences care, and the honesty that increasingly defined her public life all became part of a legacy larger than her career. Hayden Panettiere was 36 years old when she died. She had already lived several lifetimes in the space of one, and after years of letting the world see only pieces of her story, she had finally begun telling the whole thing on her own terms and in her own voice. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Now you have watched the full story of Hayden Panettiere's life and everything she opened up about before her passing. If this video moved you, hit the like button and make sure you subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Hayden's legacy and what she meant to you. We read every single one. And if you want to keep watching, the next video is right here, waiting for you.